So, hello everybody, and welcome to another talk. Today I'm going to be talking with Dr. Barbara Gerke. She's currently, I'm speaking to you it's at the Kingdom of Bhutan at the moment. So we're doing a bit of a long distance talk this morning. We all got up early. Well, I got up early to do it. Barbara didn't. She's at the sun setting over there. So please forgive any kind of sound issues or video issues. It's a long way for that signal to travel, so things can happen, but bear with us. I'm sure it'll all be fine. So I'd just like to give a little bit of background as to how I know all these people I'm interviewing. So Barbara and I sort of connected. I think it was was it in Brighton, wasn't it, that we first met up? You happened to be doing a talk in that area, so we kind of connected, swapped notes, and I was looking at what she was doing. Very interesting character, lots of interesting stories, similar to my own interests. I mean, I'm more the Indian Rasa Shastra tradition. Barbara's kind of more the Tibetan alchemical tradition. But there's lots of crossovers, and I'm sure she'll do a better job of explaining it than me. So I just thought it'd be interesting to invite her on and to hear a little bit about what she's doing, perhaps some work that she's currently working on, a little bit about her background, and just introduce what she's been up to. Really, I just think it's sort of pretty fascinating topic. So. Over to you, Barbara. Did you want to sort of explain for people listening to this how you got into this? A little bit about your background. What attracted you to this work?
Sure. Thanks so much for having me on and for this conversation. It doesn't happen so often that somebody asks really about how I got into this, and the interest, the background. Anyway, maybe I start in the present. I'm right now here in Bhutan
Okay.
on a fieldwork visit for two research projects that I currently lead at the University of Vienna. And one is, which I started most recently, is on the pandemic and Sowa Rigpa. So my main interest has been in Tibetan medicine for many, many years now. It's very often called Sowa Rigpa, which means the science of healing. And Sowa Rigpa is the Tibetan term that Tibetan medicine has been recognized under in India since 2010. But when I first came to India in 1988, everybody was just calling it Tibetan medicine.
Okay.
And so that's changed over the years. But my interest is still there, and with a degree and in medical and social and cultural anthropology, I've been researching it really now for a very long time. So my current project here is to look at Sowa Rigpa and the pandemic in Bhutan, but also generally at pandemic narratives, like how people responded to the pandemic, how they thought about it, what kind of rituals they did, how they protected themselves through amulets, through medicine, substances, how they treated COVID-19. So that's across the Himalayas. And I've had two postdocs on that project, one from the US and one from Belgium. So that project is still running. The other one is on potency and Sowa Rigpa, and explaining what makes a substance potent in Tibetan medicine. So that's a really interesting project, which is now coming to an end at the end of this year. And in that project, which I also worked in with a team of other anthropologists, and there we really tried to look at the artisanship of making medicines. We spent time with different physicians across the Himalayas, mainly in Ladakh, Nepal, India. That one doesn't cover Bhutan so much, even though I did some research here on a pandemic formula, which I look at in more detail on also in terms of potency. So there we tried really, hanging out with Amchis across the Himalayas. Amchi is the Mongolian term for Tibetan doctor, widely used across the Himalayas. And we've been making medicines together, and while making medicines together, looking at the artisanship, looking at their tools, at how they grind and boil and cook substances, and how they understand potency. And that work is currently coming out in a book, which will be published next year by Heidelberg. It will be an open access book, so anybody can, read and download it for free from anywhere. And it has lots of photographs on medicine making. So I'm actually sitting here in Bhutan right now, finishing this book. That's why that's very present in my mind with my team, Tony Titwell, Callum Blakey, and Jan van der Walt. So 4 of us are writing this project book together. And that's been really interesting to, look at very, very different ideas of what Tibetans call nupa, or potency, which is more a potential, like what's the potential in a substance to become a medicine, and how that potential is crafted through the art of medicine making. So that's been a very interesting project. But going backwards from the previous project was on mercury, and this is what gets us into alchemy. So that's my last book, Taming the Poisonous, which is also open access, published by Heidelberg University Publishing. And that's sort of really 10 years of research. I started this early on, I think 2011 or so. I got the funding at Humboldt University of Berlin in Germany, and then a project on precious spirits in Vienna, where I looked at how mercury is processed and be used in these various precious spirits, the use of precious stones and metals in medicine, and really a very, very fascinating topic we can go deeper into as we go along in the conversation. And that interest really arose out of my PhD, which makes me go further backwards, which I did on concepts of the lifespan, life forces among Tibetans in the Darjeeling Hills. That was sort of my first real deeper research, studying how Tibetans in the Himalayas understand life forces, what they think about their lifespan, whether they think, as you live so and so many years long, is that like a fixed set amount, or is that flexible? How can it be detected? They have their astrological predictions on the lifespan. They do divinations on the lifespan, on different life forces when they get sick. And so I was very fascinated by also all these Seduk, Sewang rituals, these life force enhancing rituals that were taking place in the Darjeeling Hills. So I attended a lot of these long life rituals and interviewed people, from very normal folks attending these rituals to monks and lamas conducting them, trying to figure out what they're doing there. And this also linked up with my interest in Chulen, or rejuvenation practices in the Tibetan tradition, that I researched and wrote about quite a bit. And my interest in these longevity practices was pretty much there from the beginning, when I first got to India and came to know about Tibetan medicine, and sort of saw, wow, they have that it's such a rich tradition. They have so much there, and it's not just looking for an active ingredient in a plant or substance, but it's making compounds that affect the body, as a whole. And I was fascinated by that approach to medicine really early on. My background in Germany was actually nursing, so I wanted to become a doctor and went to nursing school. Always thought I would go to medical school and study medicine. But during the 3 years of nursing school, I sort of realized some of the madness of biomedicine, and I thought, I don't want to live such a life, a hectic life with night shifts and weekend shifts, and actually an unhealthy lifestyle to practice medicine. And then I was just looking for alternatives, and then via Ayurveda, I came to India for an internship with an Ayurvedic doctor actually, and then while in India I heard about the Tibetans in Dharamsala, and then went there and stayed there and started studying Tibetan language and Tibetan medicine. So that was in my early 20s, and from there the road goes in unusual ways that you don't know at the beginning when you started.
Yeah, we all sort of find what we're looking for somehow by a series of strange coincidences. You kind of end up being like following your dharma. You just find your path in the end. So
you just have to keep searching and looking and living, and then it unfolds. So at that time I had no idea I would end up in medical anthropology and become an academic researcher. But I gave up the idea of actually becoming a medical practitioner relatively early on, because I realized studying in India, and even if I would complete a degree in Tibetan medicine, which is extremely difficult, and I did it for a year to realize what it means to study Tibetan medicine with a lot of memorization, classical Tibetan texts, recitations, but then also realizing that it was illegal to practice that in Europe. It's illegal to import medicines, and you're always in this gray zone. And then I realized I can't really make a profession out of this, however much I'm interested. But then discovering medical anthropology and going to university and getting a degree made me realize, right, I can actually do what I love doing, and that's researching Tibetan medicine.
I mean, it's interesting in a way. I've kind of drifted a little bit into that myself, because I'm like you. I'm fascinated by it, but the practice of it is more difficult, particularly when you're talking about these minerals, metals, gemstones, all those kind of things. So that's obviously straight off the table in most Western countries. So I've ended up kind of documenting it more than actually using it, although I'm very interested in trying to reproduce, trying to copy the methods and make these things. So in a way, I can completely sympathize, but I mean, there are people in Germany that are doing Tibetan medicine, but I mean, how much of what they're doing is it just kind of like purely herbal then, or are they just kind of, how would that work? Do you think would they be able to do?
I think they have to have another degree, like they have to be a Heilpraktiker or, certified naturopath, or really to have an MD in medicine, to have a license to work. And then what they can use is, the philosophy of Tibetan medicine, dietary advice, constitutional advice, but you cannot import multi-compound herbal medicines from Asia into most of Europe. I think, in Germany, no, Austria, no. Actually, the TCM practitioners have it a lot easier, because it's allowed to import single ingredients through pharmacy in Europe, and then the pharmacy will take responsibility and check that the substances are clean, and they're compounded. And then so as a TCM practitioner, you can write a prescription, the patient takes it to the pharmacy, and the pharmacy then puts the single ingredients together and gives you the tea or whatever you're taking, and that's fine. But to import
ready-made
Tibetan pills, which have a minimum of 3 ingredients up to 150, it's impossible to get this through any kind of EU checks. But then we have, of course, one pharmacy in Europe, Padma AG in Switzerland, which is, a totally legal company, and who have managed really to produce some Tibetan formulas and sell them in the European market as medicines. I think in some countries it's as supplements, that's a bit easier, but in Switzerland it's really as medicine.
Have you had a chance to compare those to see kind of like what they might be doing with what they're doing in, where you are? Is that something you've had a chance to look at, or you just know of this company?
No, no, I went to their pharmacy. I know their previous direct, like I know the people who set it up, they've existed for 50 years, more than 50 years now. And they have a total GMT, top-notch, clean pharmacy. And it takes them like 2 years to do all the paperwork and all the tests, to get the ingredients together. Yeah, and they have I don't have exact figures in my head, but I remember out of 20 people employed there, 18 do the paperwork and two make the medicines. And then, they have one guy, because they have big machines, and it's just top-notch GMP factories. So
Wow.
making the actual pill or capsule, I think they largely have capsules, is done by machines that's overlooked by one or two people, but getting the paperwork done for importing the ingredients, testing them for heavy metals and whatever, like the, really pure ingredients. So that takes the time and energy and manpower. So very different from the little cottage industry pharmacies we visit here in the Himalayas, where the amchis are going to the mountains, collect their herbs and minerals, and then sit there and grind them and boil them and make their own medicines. And even the small cottage industry companies that exist here that also use some machines, that, you can't compare that to a EU GMP factory.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about that, because that's basically what we're super interested in. It's like going back to the grassroots and really seeing how this stuff's made. So when you're when you've been sourcing these places to go and study and document what they're doing, I mean, are you going from the sort of largest setup to something really, really small, literally just one guy who's making everything, or is there usually a group of people? I mean, describe a little bit about the sort of pharmacy setup that you've been working with and seeing.
Okay. So, so I've been mainly working in India, and one interesting example I could bring up here is from Ladakh, which is in northwestern India and the high Himalayas. You fly, I think, more than an hour from Delhi, and you get out of the plane and you're on around 3,600 meters altitude with hardly any trees, other than when there's irrigation, there have some poplars and willows, but otherwise it's pretty high up there. And so we went there to meet some of the amchis. And of course, they have, in the capital, they have a big national institute of Sowa Rigpa, which is now under the Indian government, and they're registered there. Amchis there, they have now an official, school there, training. They have access to bigger pharmacies in the city that provides them with medicines. They have their clinics. They can see up to 100 patients a day and give out medicines. So you have these sort of institutionalized bigger places. But then in the city itself, you also have some amchis that studied, at the Mensikangan Dharamsala, which is in Himachal Pradesh, and which is sort of the biggest Tibetan medical institute in India. Has existed there since the 60s. And so most amchis, actually, you have a degree, have been going there to study 5 years plus a year of internship, and some of them end up in the pharmacy there and get additional pharmacy training, and then open up their own independent clinic and pharmacy. So we work with one of them, Amchit Surcham. He'll also be in the book. And he's a Gelugpa monk, so he's a Buddhist practitioner and monk. He studied in Dharamsala, and then he came back to Leh because he's originally from Nubra, a very remote valley, even further up the mountain. And he has his own clinic there in Leh, and he makes about 70 types of medicines.
70?
He has 70, yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I have some pictures of his pharmacy with all the different, jars of medicine, so we can intersperse some of his of these photos. And he also arranges to collect them all the ingredients himself. Like he's been doing it now. He's in his early 70s now, so he's been doing this for decades. So he knows where to get the ingredients. Some he'll source himself from the mountains, some he'll buy from collectors, some he has to order from the Indian plains, because some plants, like Tibetan medicine, is a very heterogeneous medical system that develops often with a lot of influence from different parts of Central Asia. So you can imagine there, had traders from India, from Mongolia, from China, from all over the place, via the Silk routes getting into Tibet. And some of the substances were traded really from far away, like pearls, corals, even the three myrobalan fruits, came from India. So it's always been, like, for hundreds of years, it's been a very heterogeneously mixed medical system that Tibetans made their own and have their own lineages, their own traditions, their own, formulas. But sourcing it really from all over the place. And a lot of it is high altitude plants. Some of it's very low altitude. And they basically use everything, because if you look at the world in terms of the 5 elements and the 3 humors, everything can be a medicine. You just have to know how to use it, how to source it, how to understand its potency and mix it together. So it's but coming back to Amchit Sojum and his clinic, so he invited us to make this Chongqi Dao, which is a calcite or limestone preparation that is done once a year across many Sowa Rigpa pharmacies during a full moon night. And it's a special way to sort of enhance the cooling potency of this white limestone powder. So first you have to source the rocks, and they get them like in big pieces of limestone rocks, which they bring from the mountains. Then I've seen it with Amchit Sojum. I've also seen it really in even more remote pharmacies where you have one practitioner who will sit there, for hours, sort of break up the stone, take off the black impurities, like make it really white and same size little stones, and they will be boiled. You change, like it took us all day boiling these stones, replacing the water, boiling them again, replacing the water, till they're really clear, till the water is very clear, and then again you dry them for a few days. And then we came back, a few days after, on the full moon day. They do it on the full moon of the 8th Tibetan month, which usually falls in September. And so we went there in the evening of the full moon day, and actually the day before, because these dried, boiled limestone rocks and still had to be ground up on really with stones, grinding stones all by hand, sift, and then we had a real beautiful white, clean powder.
If you drop a little bit on the tongue, if you try a little bit at that stage, is it still gritty, or is it literally like talcum powder? It's so fine, there's no grit. Did you get a chance?
No, it's not as fine as talcum, but it's pretty fine. And then on the full moon day, you have this, like, whatever, 5 kilos of that powder, and then Amchit Sojum had organized several liters of fresh Zomo milk, which is a hybrid from the yak and a cow, which you get high there in higher altitudes. In lower altitudes in Dharamsala, they would use cow milk. And then you sit on the rooftop, full moon is coming up, and you're there with your bowl of this white Chongqi powder and the boiled milk, and you start mixing it. And it goes on for hours and hours and hours, exposed to the full moon light. Amchit Sojum was like reciting the Medicine Buddha mantra, and he was doing his Medicine Buddha practice to, sort of bless and consecrate this chongqi paste while he was, exposing it to the full moon night. And I think it was about 4 hours into it, around midnight, that he finished. Or we all finished. We each had our bowl and finished having this. Yeah, it already feels very cool. It's like a cool white paste, and then we were making these chongqi cakes, and put them out on plastic sheets on the rooftop and exposed them further to the moonlight for the rest of the night. And went to sleep basically, and then in the morning he woke us up before sunrise because they had to be collected and taken down into his temple room, not to be touched by any sun rays whatsoever. So yeah, we got at 6 and carried them all down, and then they were drying in his temple room for another 5-6 days, so they were really dry. And that's then, in a way, a form of storage of pre-processed calcium carbonate substance, but with a very cooling property of the full moon. And then they have that ready for the year, and then when he has maybe 5 to 10 formulas that use processed calcite. Maybe this full moon calcite, I think he only had 2 formulas where he adds that. So when he then makes that medicine, he has it ready and he grinds up these cakes and adds it to the formulas. So, and we've observed that in several pharmacies. So there are then different lineages. Some amchis make, in Ladakh, they make the cake with a hole and it looks like a donut cake.
Okay.
And in Himachal Pradesh, they were just sort of making just little pieces they were making a lot more, like he was making 150 kilos, not just 5 kilos. The physician there had a much bigger pharmacy, and he had also 16 employed workers. So that was much more volume. And so he had adapted his technology to manage with laborers, with time, amchis are very practical. They see what needs to be done, and very practical when it comes to making things. So, and some also use machines and grind them, the boiled chongqi rocks very carefully in a grinding machine, especially if they have to make 150 kilos of them. They don't sit and do it by hands. But the amchis we saw up in Ladakh, they all did it by hand. Even though they have some grinding machines, but they said, oh no, the machines get clogged, it's very fine powder then, and it's really difficult. It's better to do it by hand. So,
are they using, what sort of mortar is it? Like granite mortars, or is it more like ceramic mortars or anything? What's the sort of traditional way of grinding?
Probably granite, like it's stones that they collect these grinding stones themselves in riverbeds and also carve them. I've actually recently wrote an article about just these grinding stones together with an Indian medical anthropologist who spent a lot of time with these amchis up in Spiti and Lahul. And so, which is really fascinating. So they have these grinding stones, and some are so old, like grandfather, collected it, and then it's being passed down in the family lineage of amchis, and they keep it really like a sacred tool, because they also say, the deity lives on the grinding stone. They do the ritual practice while they grind, and they spend hours grinding. Like grinding is if it's done by hand in these little Himalayan pharmacies, it's really, that's your daily bread, is grinding your
I know.
plants.
I sort of got into, when I came back from Sri Lanka, I wanted to, they use a lot of those boat-shaped mortars, the elongated, so like a backwards and forwards stroke. And I wanted desperately to have one of those mortars, but it's not practical to ship them back. They just weigh so much, and the cost. So I went to a local place where they make, stonemasons locally, and I just talked to the guy there and just said, look, I'm interested in, could I commission one of your students to make one? And he said, well, why don't you make it yourself? And I said, I've got no idea how to do that. And he said, oh, I can show you. So just once a week, again, and one of those weird coincidences, once a week I used to go in there and I used to work on it. And he showed me how to make it. And I actually made one that was half decent. I mean, it was nowhere near as good as the sort of professional Indian ones, but I mean, it worked and it looked okay. But it gave me a great insight into how you actually do that. And it's so difficult to do it. And I was using a slightly, well, it was granite of sorts, but it was a softer grade of granite. So it was like a sort of baby granite. So it was okay for
Mm,
somebody like me to make a few mistakes. But if you do the real hard stuff, like 8, 9 on the Mohs scale, it plucks. So when you hit it, it chucks out a big lump. So there's a real skill from putting your finger behind the chisel and then hitting it, and know that you're just getting
mm,
the right kind of pressure to without it plucking and chucking
mm,
shards out. So I've got a great appreciation for anybody that does that work.
mm.
Having done it
Yeah,
a little bit, I realize how much work there is in that.
yeah, yeah. And they even have the stories like my colleague Stuti Singh collected up there, where they source a good rock. How do you find a good rock? Yeah? What is a good stone for grinding stone? And they find them in riverbeds, and they make certain sounds when the water runs over them. So you have to know the sound of the water to detect, is this a good hard stone? Is it a soft stone? And then you have to carry it home and chisel it, and and then it's part of the family loom. And if you have your grandfathers or great grandfathers, if it's the third, fourth, fifth in the lineage,
Mm.
it has potency, because they say, like, if I grind on that rock, it it adds um, to the plants that are ground on them. So we have some wonderful interviews with these amchis, um, and their traditions and the importance of these tools, and how the deep relationship they have with their tools, and how they're part of making medicines,
Mm.
how they keep them, how they clean them, how they even then when a patient comes. I remember Stuti telling me, like, the patient comes in and the doctor check the pulse, and
Mm.
then gets the herbs which are actually already ground, but then one more time puts it on the grinding stone and grinds it one more time in front of the patient,
Mm.
and then offers it to the patient, like a beautiful doctor-patient relationship, actually, all in the living room. Um, and of course, you don't get that in other institutionalized clinics, where they now, like the big pharmacies, they usually make pills because they last better in the moist Indian climate, and then they give out pills. And a lot of amchis even don't know how to make their own medicines anymore, and they just buy them ready-made from pharmacies and then give them out. But if you go up into the high mountains, into these remote villages, you can still see this way of practicing and making their own medicine. And also villagers come and help, because the amchis used to practice for the village even without getting money for their medicines. But villagers come, they help, even with the grinding and cutting or collecting, or they do farm works. And most of the amchis are also farmers who make their
Mm.
living and have their food. So they don't live off being an amchi up there in these
Oh, so
remote
it's like
areas.
you're farming for most of the year, and then you just.
It's No, it's like you farm. You have your farms to have your food, But then in the evening, on the afternoon, when you are free from farming work, you also sit there and grind your medicines and collect your medicines. And
Wow.
the patients in return help you with the farming or with the grinding. It's sort of a barter system, or bring you food or whatever.
Mm.
That was sort of the traditional way of doing it. But now, since Sowa Rigpa is recognized, and there are these institutions, and they have now recognized education and degree, and then you get a proper job in one of these clinics and a proper salary. Like, it has totally changed the way Sowa Rigpa is practiced. It's very interesting ethnographically, and to study it like this, it's always very interesting, because there's so much change happening, and how this affects amchi's thinking about potency, what happens to the medicines if they are made in these bigger pharmacies or in larger amounts even, or even using a machine. A lot of these remote amchis don't want to use machines. They said use a grinding machine, or, machines make the medicines cooler because they have this wind element grinding it fast. So it increases the lung element in the medicine. So it's all, they have a very different way of looking. All dying out. There's a lot of young people who don't want to do it because it's hard work being an amchi. Or they go into the big cities and get a degree and get educated and then don't want to come back to the village and be an amchi. So, yeah, we've had several family lineages that are now sort of, reaching their end with the last amchi who doesn't have an apprentice anymore. So this you see a lot, actually.
Mm.
So there's an element of real change in it.
Do you think it is dying out? I mean, do you see it as it's gradually on a decreasing line, or do you think there's interest? Because I've noticed in the last 10 years, like when I came back from Sri Lanka and I was sort of looking online for articles, there was very little on the Ayurvedic alchemical medicine side, but that's gone up and it's got more. There seems to be more interest in it, and particularly in the last 5 years. I get a lot of people email me and talk about what they're doing in India or Sri Lanka, and and it seemed. And I said, "Is there there's a bit of an uptake. They're kind of going back to the traditional methods." I wonder whether did you see any signs of that over there? Is there kind of a bit of a resurgence, or is it just kind of petering out, or how do you see it going?
It goes in very interesting ways. Like in some really remote places, it's still running because people are cut off from the roads in winter with high snowfall, so they don't have any other access to medical care. So they rely on their amchi, especially, during the winter months. But then the moment there's a road to the village, like a real road, people also travel and move much more than if you have to walk to the village. So the road access makes a difference. But then also, things have become so much more expensive. Transport is expensive. It's actually often some of the amchis with road access also go into lower elevations during the winter to collect ingredients from lower elevations. And then, I don't want to say it's dying out. It's not a black and white story. It's very mixed, and even now you have studied, like Ayurveda already got into their institutional training decades before Sowa Rigpa. Sowa Rigpa is just starting to really institutionalize. So, and even in Ayurveda, despite their whole institutionalization, they still have their lineages, they have their Gurukul system. It just changes the way it's being practiced. So it's to be seen how Sowa Rigpa and the amchis deal with it. There's definitely lineages dying out where there's no apprentice. Even amchi children, even in his early 70s, who's going to take over his pharmacy? Like, he doesn't have kids, he doesn't have a nephew, he doesn't have students. Yeah, so you have quite a few of these places where students are missing. But then you never know. Maybe there's another student who will, buy his pharmacy at some point and start his own thing. Even somebody he hasn't trained or he's not related to. You just don't know. Life is very colorful and unpredictable these days.
And there's a lot of work involved in making these things as well. I think people are always a bit shocked. Sometimes I do stuff for Ayurvedic students. We'll have like a summer workshop or a retreat, and just do something basic like a few medicated oils or a medicated ghee. And everyone's like horrified. I mean, how much work it is to do all the decoctions, just to make it the way that it's normally made. And I said, yeah, you can kind of shortcut. You could probably put couple of these decoctions together, but traditionally they'll be made separately and then added. And people are always, well, couldn't I just do that in a blender? And couldn't I do that in a grinder, coffee grinder? And I said, well, it's not done like that. I mean, this is the traditional way to make it. Of course, there are shortcuts, but like you were saying, you introduce other factors into the manufacturing process, and you get new problems come up. So I tried to keep it all as traditional as possible. But just circling back around a little bit, I was going to ask you, what's the main method of delivery in these systems? Are they more kind of Chinese, where it's Chinese influence, so it's kind of more like decoctions, or is it more powders, or are they more pills, or are they taking it with ghee or with honey, or kind of what's the best delivery system or the preferred delivery system?
Mm, mm. Up in the higher remote areas of the Himalayas, it's definitely powders because that's easy to make. Like you grind it, you have it, and Amchi said that with the powder they can tell if it's fresh or not. They say sometimes with the pills, even though they last longer, but inside it might be old and you don't see it because it's still hard and shiny outside.
Mm.
And so a lot of the high altitude, small scale Amchis really prefer their powders. They also don't have pill machines. Like then making the pill is another real round of work. Yeah. So powders are easy. They are handy. You keep them fresh. They don't last very long. Their shelf life is rather short, but you know what you have. Sort of. Whereas the bigger pharmacies make pills, especially in the lower elevation, also Dharamsala, it's very moist, heavy monsoon. Powders will just mold. But pills, you can actually keep. You make a good pill and a good coating, and you keep it in an airtight container. You make it through the monsoon, and they have a longer shelf life. They're easier to ship and pack. So, and here in Bhutan is actually quite interesting. They're trying very, very different things. They make powders, which they now put in capsules. They run these modern capsule machines. And so they have capsules. They have tablet makers now trying to, press plant material into tablets. They also make pills. They have teas. I haven't seen so many real decoctions here. Like there's some, they give out powders and they say, okay, make a decoction and drink it. So that they do have. But it's not like in Chinese medicine where you have the different individual ingredients and then you make your pot of, bitter decoction and drink it. It's sort of really different. You have sort of your powders and your pills or your capsules, and you have your 3 times a day, different doses, and take it hot water usually as a carrier, sometimes with honey or raw milk. Sometimes also alcohol, their medicinal wines.
Okay.
That can be prepared. But it's usually now, popping a pill and taking it with hot water. That's the simplified form.
And what's the main things that they're dealing with? Is there a kind of commonality of symptoms? It's like very common, this kind of thing in this area. Are they getting, what's the kind of mainstay of the people coming through? Is it kind of like fever or infections, or what was the kind of, and even going back to this, you were talking about the pandemic situation at the beginning. What's the kind of things that are coming through the pharmacy? What are they dealing with on a daily basis?
Well, so the pandemic, of course, was very specific. And at the beginning of the pandemic, a lot of Amchis came together in these different institutes and thought, well, what are we going to do? Looking through their formula books, what do we have? And then seeing, it's all flu-like symptoms. They, of course, made use of their very established flu formulas. So they have formulas for fever, for headache, for body ache, which they have used, which are literally hundreds of years old. Like some of these formulas are really, really old. And actually, I've met only very few Amchis who thought that they had to make something new during the pandemic. Like they didn't consider, even though COVID was sort of a new disease, it was a new virus for them. It was not new. They sort of could relate to it, even in their texts. They're had the different descriptions of these contagious spreading fevers, so that they could relate to it with what they had and their trusted formulas. Like they thought, yeah, we can treat this. And they really developed different schemes. You know, the beginning stage you take this, middle stage you take that, at the end you take that, and yeah, and it was really different in different countries. You know, like here in Bhutan, Sowa Rigpa was not used during the pandemic. They really went a very biomedically shaped way, and they had at the time 5 people in parliament biomedically trained. So there are a lot of doctors in the government at the time, including the health minister and the prime minister. So they had a really very different approach. They use Buddhism and religion and rituals a lot, also to communicate with people, protective rituals, protective amulets, but no Sowa Rigpa medicine to actually treat COVID-19. That was sort of off the table. So whereas India was also relatively strict officially, they couldn't treat any COVID-19 patients, because once you were detected, you were put into quarantine, and, the government sort of took care of that. But a lot of people couldn't test. There weren't enough tests around. People had the flu. They went to the Amchi. They took their flu medicine. And they used their established formulas. And I only met one or actually 2 physicians who were very active pharmacists. They were having their own pharmacy, and I felt, okay, let me make something stronger to face this. Yeah. So that was really interesting, and there's a lot to discover there. Unfortunately, there's been only one study in the US with I think about 140 patients and 15 Amchis who live and work in the US who started documenting, and there's this published study which you can find online on seeing which formulas were used or how sort of effective Tibetan medicine was with COVID-19 treatment for, mild and medium severe cases. They didn't have severe cases, of course. So, but here in India, in the Himalayas, there's not much, documentation didn't really happen during the pandemic in a way that you have now any figures or numbers that you could say this worked or this didn't work. It's really all by experience. You can interview doctors and say, yeah, for headaches, this Dasimapa was my best formula, and it really worked pretty well. And so you can see, they're all used sort of 10, 15 key formulas that they already had. Yeah, so it's very interesting to collect these experiential stories from Amchit on the pandemic, also retrospectively, and see, what worked for them and what didn't work. So that's a bit of what I've been doing, and I've been focusing on one particular formula that was really made from Bhutan to Ladakh, all across the Himalayas, which also has a fascinating history because it's sort of a smelly amulet, and it's a formula from the 13th century which combines 9 substances that really, you put them together, they work through what they call Drima Ginupa, like the potency of smell. So you wear it around your neck as an amulet, you smell it, and so the power of the smell and the consecrated substances, all of these substances go through a ritual. Every substance has a specific deity, a specific mantra attached to it. So it's not easy to make it. And there are different variations, but many pharmacies made it because that was their first aid even before, COVID hit India. Is that, what do we have? We have this protective smelly amulet pill, which they already had made during SARS. It's actually sort of an infectious disease protecting anti-epidemic pill. I think that historically was made in Tibet maybe during a time of epidemics, but maybe also for all the traders who were traveling across to protect them from infection while traveling and trading. and yeah, people wear it and then smell it.
9 ingredients of like aromatic herbs, or are these formulations of using herbs, or what's the kind of base for it?
It's really interesting. I'm trying to figure out why these 9. They're so because they're not all smelly. Some are very smelly, like asafoetida or black sulfur, stinky, smelly. Yeah.
Mm.
Others are strong poisons, are known as antidotes to poison, like aconite fruit. That's why you don't eat it; you just smell it.
Mm.
You know, because the aconite hasn't been fully processed to be consumed. So there are variations of the pill that you can also eat, but then you have to process it differently. But they also have things like, musk, of course, beautiful
Musk, yeah.
smell, but they also have like Chinese black ink. So these black ink sticks, which I think is for the color,
Mm-hmm.
they don't really smell much. You know, even though previously they have put some aromatic herbs in Chinese ink. They have things like bezoar, you know, or giwam like bezoar, which has been traded across Europe and Asia for centuries as a protective panacea. You know, so they're
Is that the
like
gallstone?
even
Is that the
yeah, it's
yeah,
it's
yeah.
sort of said. Um, so they're like these intestinal calculi.
Mm.
They're they form in intestines of animals,
Mm.
and they were already during the Great Plague in Europe. They were used as
Mm.
protection, and even the idea of being protected by smell is also a very old idea. If you go
Mm.
to the plague in Europe, the plague doctors used to wear their bird
Oh, the
beak
bird beaks, yeah.
marks, the bird beaks, and they put lavender in it and trying to protect themselves with smells,
Mm.
because disease also stinks.
Mm.
If you're really sick, if you really have an epidemic outbreak with horrible disease, the smell must be, horrendous. People
Mm.
dying, wounds, buboes.
Mm.
It's not a nice affair.
Mm.
So doctors had to protect themselves. And in the Four Tantras, the main Tibetan medical text, the formula of this amulet is also in the chapter actually as a protection for doctors. So if you have to go out and see really sick people, you protect yourself. And that's one thing, you can protect yourself.
Yeah, I was
You have
thinking like in the medieval times, we would use lime, wouldn't we? Even lime would be put onto the bodies. You'd use what was it, slake lime to try and help dissolve and reduce the toxicity, by covering the bodies before you buried them and stuff like that. So it's interesting that the calcite is such an important part, or seems to be a very big part of the tradition, and yet Ayurvedically in the rasa tradition, it's a kind of a peripheral. It's a miscellaneous. It doesn't appear in any particular varga, but apart like Shuddha varga for white substances. So you'd have like chalk and limestone and some of the like calcites or calcite itself, or burnt conch shell, because they produce a white powder. But it's interesting that this has become a bigger part of their tradition. In the Tibetan tradition, it seems to be more potent. It's like a very powerful. I think you were saying we spoke earlier before we talked today, and you were saying even the stones seem to vary a little bit. Sometimes it could be real calcite, like the real crystalline calcite, but other times it could be just a regular kind of lime. It's almost like there's a variation in the stone itself. So it's quite fascinating that that's become such a big part of their tradition and so important.
And now going from the black to the white, right? This black 9 compound pill as protection for the pandemic, and the importance of black nakpo in Tibetan also means something very powerful. It's something strong, it has power in itself if it's black. And then the white ingredients, like calcite, and also maybe one interesting thing which sort of shows you the range of Tibetan medicine, like Patna in Switzerland, they also make a formula called Chongqi 6, which they sell as an antacid. It's really good for stomach and stomach acidity. So, and they do none of this processing, you know, of the limestone that the Amchis and the Himalayas do. They buy 100% pure calcium carbonate in a chemist shop, and that's their chongqi powder that's being added to the medicine.
Okay.
And it works, you know, it sells well, it's apparently effective. But if you show that to an Amchi, like I had a Padma package with this chongqi 6, you know, and showed it to an Amchi in the Himalayas, and we were discussing, like, why do you, days of work and grinding and boiling, why don't you just buy calcium carbonate in the pharmacy? You can get it in India, you know. And it's an absolute no-go. Like, it doesn't have the nupa, it doesn't have the, you have to process it, you have to make it, you know, digestible. This whole processing is about making substances also digestible, acceptable to the body. And, you know, it's much more complicated than what I say it. I'm really simplifying. But just to try to get this idea across of what it means to work with substances. And, you know, chongqi is just one ingredient. You have 5 others or 21 others that you still have to mix with that. And each of these ingredients has often been pre-processed in one or the other way, you know, and then they come together, each with their taste and their powers and their elements and their, it's a very complex pharmacology. I have, like, amazing respect for these Amshis and the amount of knowledge they have to have in their heads, and it's a lot of orally transmitted knowledge. You know, that it's really interesting if you look at these formula texts. Of course, the formulas are there, and you get, like, you're lucky, you get the ingredients, a little bit about processing, but very little is written down on the actual artisanship of making medicines. This is all orally transmitted, and maybe Amchis have their little, you know, notebooks. And this is actually all over Tibet. I heard it. Tibetanist talk about it, and he said even for metalworking in Tibet, this was like one of the most secret artisanships, working with metals, making statues. And they wouldn't write anything down, you know, it's kept within the guild, within the family. It's also a question of survival, a question of passing knowledge only on to trusted students. Because it's your profession. It's like a guild, the guild of metal workers. So there's not so much written about artisanship. And same with medicine, like the real detail you get only if you work with another Amchi. That's why you can't just get the book and make it, you know, or you think, I could process mercury, you know, I just have to collect the text, translate them, and it's impossible, because all these details are orally transmitted in a very careful, secret way.
So how about with, like, the heating element? How much of a heating element you like? So if they're working with metals, are they working with very high temperatures? Are they doing like the Indian putters, you know, with the sort of cow dung, or are they firing it another way? Are they using sort of blowers, bellows, or charcoal, or what's the kind? Did you see any sort of high temperature work being done?
I haven't seen that myself. I've seen some of these little stoves in small scale pharmacies, and they're really just very little mud stoves, fired with charcoal, like wood and charcoal, and then burning the metals for days and days and days. But I haven't seen that myself, because that's the metal processing, you know, is part of the mercury work here, which I researched and managed to describe and get the concepts and the social history of it, and could document a lot of the practices. But I was never allowed to watch them, because women are not allowed to watch them. So that was really a no-go area. So I've seen the stoves when they were cold and unused, but not in practice. But there's a picture in the book, so they also use the gas stove, like to boil the mercury. They got this real amazing pot made specifically to take the heat. And then they used a gas stove because now gas gives, of course, more stable heat and can easily regulate it. So at the Mensekang, definitely they use gas for heating. But in some of these little pharmacies, I've still seen the mud stoves and the clay pots that were used to burn metals.
Are those made as well? Are they making their own crucibles? Are they all handmade, or are they kind of just buying in or just using regular cooking pots, or is there a special type of pot that they'll use, to do that?
The one they have at the Mensekang, they specifically got made. They went to Amritsar. They must have gone to some, real Indian trained person who's able to make such a really strong crucible, but they got it made in 1982 when they made it the first time, and they've used the same pot ever since.
Wow, that's quite impressive. I think every time I use the crucible, maybe twice I can use it, but usually it ends up breaking, and that's because of the heat stress, the temperature change, going from very hot to very cold and putting it back. I try to preserve them. I developed techniques that make them last longer, but yeah, generally they don't last very long. I once saw a guy at it was like a craft fair where he was demonstrating just making copper very quickly and extracting copper from ore, and he'd made a very crude, rudimentary crucible from me. So it was sand, bran, horsehair, and dung, and horse dung, and a bit of clay, and it was a mixture of those things together. And he said he would quite comfortably take 1,000 degrees, and just to do it once, it was good for one cook. But it was all available ingredients. It was easy to make, and it was reasonably successful. And I did experiment a little bit, and they are fun to use, although you've got to be careful because they can suddenly break at the critical moment and release the liquid metal. But overall, they do work, but there's nothing quite as good as buying if you get the proper crucible, it's obviously a lot safer and a lot more reliable.
Yeah, interesting. There were some stories I found in the Tibetan text when, she's also were experimenting with clay pots burning the metals. Like they have to burn 8 types of metals to make this process mercury. And and they also experience, it exploded, it broke, or we had to get the clay from this very special mountain really far away, and experiment with the clay, but they definitely have described explosions.
Yeah, even very stable metals like copper can suddenly pull a fast one on you. You can be pouring it into buttermilk, and suddenly for no reason it'll just pop. And that's usually because the pan is too shallow, and so the copper hits the bottom, and it creates a momentary point of air getting in there, and then the water vaporizing, or the milk vaporizing, and then you get this pocket of gas, and then boom, before you know it, you've got like hot copper flying around everywhere. So it's a pretty violent thing I'm just super wary with liquid metals. So amazing.
Oh, I bet. Yeah. So I was talking about the calcite, and you were asking about the different types, because we went to so many different amchis and pharmacies, and each of them asked, can you give me a little sample of your limestone piece? What are you using, as a raw material? And they all look so different. Like I got 5 different types, and they really look very, very different. And it really depends. So if you look at the Tibetan medical text, sometimes they show up 25 types of different calcite, and they have different names. And but the Amchi said, it's too complicated. I can't even tell you exactly which type this is, but this is a type I get from this particular mountain my teacher showed me, and I always go to this mountain or to this quarry, and I get it from there myself. So everybody has their particular sources, which also link to their lineages, or where they feel, this is really good, pure white limestone on calcite. And so they source it from there, and there's great variation. But generally, so the whiter the better. Like really, if it's really deep, beautiful, white, hard calcite there, these are considered the really good quality Chongqing stones. Yeah. So that was one thing. Then, you asked me what kind of diseases they see and treat. And that, of course, varies across the Himalayas, and where you are, in a little Himalayan village, you find different diseases than in Dharamsala or Delhi. Actually, a lot of the more than 50 branch clinics that Mensakang has across India are in big Indian cities. More than 90% of their patients are Indian patients. And they also come to Dharamsala. They see a lot of cancer patients in India, but also a lot of diabetes, high blood pressure. Among the Tibetans themselves, since they're very high altitude people, but now they live in India on lower altitudes, often keeping their diets from their nomad time. So their diet is unfortunately often very heavy and butter tea. So they have a lot of high blood pressure, strokes, diabetes, a lot of and a lot of stomach cancer among Tibetans. I don't know why that is, but there's a lot of stomach cancer among Tibetans. Maybe they're not used to the Indian chili spices, and it really affects them differently. But that's very prevalent.
Interesting, because you've got like the moon as well. If you like the moon for the cooling, but obviously like Ayurvedically in Jyotish, like the moon rules the stomach as well. So it's kind of like it's got that kind of like cooling, nurturing, replenishing the mucosa, making the stomach able to hold those agni, the acids, without damaging. So somehow that lunar energy helps as well.
Yeah. And actually now one of the formulas containing the white Chongqing process, is called Drupril. It's a very popular formula that people now buy over the counter. You get it in little granules, actually, little sachets, and you can just pop it and have it. And it's very popular in India, but also I heard in Tibetan areas of China, very popular formula because of these gastric problems that people suffer from. Mainly, I think also because of the spices, the spicy diet.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, and a lot of people come to Tibetan medicine when they've tried everything else. So they got a lot of very serious end stage cancer patients, which I've seen like lining up in front of, the clinics in Dharamsala. They've already been through so much, and then at the end they're try Tibetan medicine. But you also have a lot of people that know for chronic diseases like rheumatism, arthritis, diabetes, high blood pressure, where it's really difficult to treat it with biomedicine, like long term, that they're try Tibetan medicine for these chronic diseases, because sort of also then rebalancing their diet, their constitution, their digestion helps them to find a different level of health. But it's usually very long-term treatments. So that's something to just very briefly to answer your questions. And there's great, like all across the Himalayas, you will find a real mix of biomedicine and Tibetan medicine, shamanic medicine, Ayurvedic medicine. Like there's so many different traditions here, and people really mix things widely, across different systems, and it counts more for them what works. Sometimes it's what works fast, and they don't have this ideology problem that they say, "Oh, I'm only using this or I'm only using that." So you will find them actually mixing different medical systems quite freely. Yeah.
I wonder how much of that is geographically driven, being that they are it's a slightly remote central place. It's got access to all these places around it. Plus, I mean, the Himalayas are a treasure trove of minerals. There's so many amazing rocks and, quartzes and serpentines and limestones. All these things are kind of abundant in that area. So you can see it as a sort of like a crossroads, isn't it? Those countries are a real crossroads in the world between all the great sort of like empires that have moved through that area. So it's a real crossover point, isn't it? I can see why they've become so multifaceted, why they can do or integrate so many systems.
Yeah, and it's really different countries. Like here in Bhutan, for example, healthcare is totally free for everybody. And it's the biomedical healthcare that's free, but it's also traditional Bhutanese medicine that's free. So you can go to a hospital, and every hospital has a traditional healthcare sector, and at least one amchi here, they're called dumso, sitting there. So any patient can choose between biomedicine and traditional medicine. And here it's all paid for by the government. It's a very small country, just over 700,000 people, which in India, of course, you don't have. You have to pay for biomedicine. You have to, pay for a lot of the Tibetan medicine, even though the Mensakang does offer a lot of free medicines, and they do medical camps and also in remote areas and in Tibetan settlements. So they have certain contingencies for their own Tibetan population in India to support them with Tibetan medicine. And then you have, as you say, you have also the ritualists all across Buddhism, shamanism, Hinduism that are also part of medical decision making and treatment, and often combined, with everything. So, but that's a whole other topic we can.
Maybe for another day. Yeah.
Another day.
We're coming to the end of our talk, so just sort of wrapping up at this point. How do people go about getting hold of you or getting in contact?
Yeah, so you can find me, on the University of Vienna website at our institute, and I have currently 2 project websites. So the Potent Substances project has a website. The pandemic narrative project has a website on its own, but I think the best way is through Academia Edu. I actually keep this Academia Edu page updated, and pretty much almost all my articles, books, links are on there, like those that I can share, open access are on there. And through there you can see articles, book chapters, and the books. And then through the university you can find me and contact me. I think it's better for people who are really interested, go to the University of Vienna, ISTB, like Institute for South Asian, Tibet, and Buddhist Studies, and they'll find me there with my email. I think if you put it up, there's also the option of getting a lot of spam.
Okay.
But feel free to reach out if anybody's really interested.
I would encourage people to go and check out Barbara's work. I mean, you're very generously offering a lot of this stuff for free. It's open access, so people can read all this stuff online. Of course, you can go the extra mile and get the books as well, which is great. It's just nice to be able to actually have a hard copy and read, which is nice. But like you say, many of these, much of this work is available to download and read. So I encourage people to go there. I'll put all the links up so people can find you. And thank you very much for what you're doing. Thank you for documenting all this material. It's super interesting. Well, especially for people like me, I like following what you're doing, and I'm sure other people that will watch this will be interested too. So just appreciate you coming on. Thank you for your time, and keep up the good work.
Well, thanks for having me, and thanks for your interest. It's been really my passion researching and writing about Tibetan medicine.